Hello, my name is Emmanuel. In this video, I'll be showing you how to create this hospital management dashboard using PowerApps modern controls. And at the end of this video, you would have a better understanding of how to use containers, how to create a side navigation bar, and how to use PowerApps Gallery to create this calendar within your Power App. Let's start building. Before we start building, we need to first understand the structure of this screen. As you can see, this screen is divided firstly into two major sections, the header section and the body section. And then the body section is further divided into three subsections, which are the navbar section, the dashboard section, and this calendar section. Now we are going to start building by creating these sections we just highlighted. Now you can go ahead to create a blank canvas app and rename the screen to dashboard. After doing that, we want to set the fill property of the screen to this, and then we are going to add a container. We would set the X and Y properties of that container to 0. We would set the width to parent.width and set the height to parent.height. Then let's name this container main container. Next, we are going to add a vertical container. So a vertical container allows us to align controls vertically. Now we are going to set the X and Y properties of this container to 0. And we would set the width to parent.width and set the height to parent.height. Then we are going to set the border radius to 0 and set the drop shadow property to none. Next, we are going to add another container. So let's name this container, let's say section divider. Okay, now we are going to add a container for the header. So let's add a horizontal container and we are going to name it header container. For this container, we would set the border radius to 0, the drop shadow property to none. Then we are going to turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 60. Then for the fill property, we would make that white. And inside this section divider container, we would add another container, this time around a horizontal container. A horizontal container allows us to arrange controls side by side, that is from left to right. And for this container, we are going to name it body container. We would set the border radius to 0, set the drop shadow property to none, and we can set the minimum width to 0 and the minimum height to 0, because we already have the flexible height turned on and is stretched to reach or to meet both ends of the parent container. Now, inside this body container, we need to add 3 containers for the nav bar, for the dashboard section in the middle, and for the calendar section at the right. So we are going to add 3 vertical containers. So let's name this nav. Let's add another vertical container. We are going to name this dashboard and add yet another container, another vertical container, and we are going to name this calendar. You would notice that this nav section has a background of white and the calendar section also has a background of white. So we are just going to set the fill property of those two containers to be white. Okay, then another thing we need to do is to create a gap between the header container and the body container. So to achieve that, you would click on the section divider container and add a gap of 10. We also need to create a gap between the body container and the bottom of the screen. So to do that, we would also click on that section divider container and give a bottom padding of 10. Okay, another thing we need to do, we need to add the border radius to this edge, to these edges of the container. So we are going to do that. Bottom right would be 8, then top right would also be 8, then the rest would be 0, 0, 0. Now for the calendar container, we will do the same. For the bottom left, we would set it to 8. Top right, we would also set it to 8, and then the other two would be 0, 0. I think I did the wrong thing. Bottom left is 8. Bottom right should be 0. Top left is 8, and then top right should be 0. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to allocate fill portions for these containers. So they are currently having the same size, but we want this middle container to be wider than the remaining two. So let's give a portion fill of 2.8 for the middle container, give a portion fill of 1.5 to the calendar container, while the nav container would have or retain the fill portion of 1. Okay, the next thing we would do is to remove the drop shadow of the 3 containers. You can just highlight the 3 of them and remove the drop shadow or set it to none. And that way we have the major sections in place. So the next thing we are going to do is to create the header component now. So to create a component, we are going to click on new component, and then for the component we will set the width to app.design width. Then we will set the height to 60. We are going to insert a horizontal container because we want the items inside this container to be aligned side by side. You would set the x and y property to be 0 and 0. Then we will set the width to parent.width, and the height to parent.height. Okay, then for this container we would set the border radius to 0 and the drop shadow property to none. The next thing we would do is to add a button, but before we add a button, let's create a theme, or let's add a theme for this application. So to do that, you hover on this icon here and then you click on themes, then you click on add a theme. Then for the color, you insert this color code value and then you toggle on, or you put on this toggle, you turn on this toggle and then you click on create. Okay, you can also, of course, you will need to give a name to your theme and then assign or choose your preferred font type. I like using Open Sans, and I think that's all. I can now go ahead to click on create. Now after clicking on create, that theme is selected automatically. Now let's go back to the component, and now we would add a button control. Now this button is meant for the logo of this application. We are going to remove the text. We want this to be an icon only, so this would be the layout to be icon only, and then for the icon we are going to select the home icon. Okay, now for the height and width we are going to set that to 35, and then we want to align the image to be in the center of the container. Okay, and then another thing we need to do is to change the font color to white and to also change the icon style to filled. Now we also want to add a border radius of 8. Okay, we want to create a space between the icon and the edge of this container here, so we'll just give the container a left padding of 40. Okay, next is the name of the company. We are going to insert a text label. We would stretch the text label control within this parent container. Then we would set the vertical alignment to middle, and then we want to create a space between the button and this text label. To do that, we would click on this container. Let's name this container header component. We can also rename this component as component header. Okay, y should be 0. Within this header container, we want to set a gap of 10. Okay, now for this we would set a width of, let's say, 150 for now, and then we would insert the name of the organization. So this is Med LD. Then we can go ahead to format the text. So this, for the font color, we are going to say app dot theme dot color, then dot primary color. Alright, so the next thing we need to add is the search bar. We need to add this search bar. For that, we are going to insert a an input control, a text input control. And for this, we would set the alignment to center. We would set the width to 300. Then we would set the height to 40. Then for this, we would set the border radius to 8. Then we can also input a placeholder text. So the next thing we need to do is to insert this notification icon and this user details. Now to do that, we are going to insert another container, a horizontal container. We are going to name this, so you can just name this notification. And then for the minimum height, we set it to 0. We also set the minimum width to 0, the border, the drop shadow to none, and then the border radius to 0. In this notification container, we are going to add another container. We'll be adding an ordinary container. And for this container, we would set the border radius to 0, the drop shadow property to none. We will turn off the flexible width and we would also set the alignment to center. The height and width of that container would be 38. Now within this container, we want to add an icon. And for this icon, we would set a height and width of 38. And for the X and Y alignment, we want to input parent dot width divided by 2 minus self dot width divided by 2. So this is for the X property. And for the Y property, it would also be parent dot height divided by 2 minus self dot height divided by 2. Okay, we want more room in between the icons and the container, so let's make this container to be 50 and the width to be 50 also. Now this can now be 30 and 30. Now we are going to change this icon to to male, and then change the color to this. Okay, now within this container, let's name this container say missed appointment. That's a long name. Let's just say missed. Okay, container missed icon. Now within this container, we want to add a text label, and this text label would have a height and width of 18. We can just move it to the very edge of the parent container, and then would set the font size to 8, the border radius to 16, and then the fill property to red. Another thing we want to do is to remove this text property, and then in the alignment, we want it to be at the center, and the vertical alignment should be in the middle. We also want to ensure that there is no left or right padding inside the text label. We can just input 88 or any number to see to see the alignment of the text within that text label. So we need to change the font color to white. Okay, that way we can see what we are doing. We want this label to overlap the icon a little bit. So the white property of that text label can be 5. Alright, now for the second icon, we are going to copy this container and add it or place it inside this notification container. Now for the next one, we are going to change this to this bell icon here. That's the closest thing we have to a bell. And then we'll change the fill property to green. And that's it for those two icons. Okay, we want this to be able to overlap the bell a little bit. So we need to move it back. Let's make this 30. Let's say 28. Yeah. Alright, now that we have these two sets, we want to create or we want to make this user information part of the header. So to achieve that, we would add an image icon, image. We will set the alignment to center. The height can be 35. The width also can be 35. And then we want to set the border radius to 35 also. And for the image, we would use user.image. Now we are going to add another container, this time around a vertical container. So this would help us create these two information in this order. Alright, to do that, we would set the minimum height to 0 and the minimum width. Let's turn off this flexible width and give it a width of, let's say, 180. Okay, then for the border radius, it will be 0, and the drop shadow would be none. Then inside this container, we are going to add two text labels. We are going to set the alignment to stretch. Then copy and paste this inside. So for the height, we are going to set a height of 20 for both. And then we want these two text labels to be aligned to the center of the parent container. To achieve that, we click on the parent container and we justify the alignment to center. Now for the first text label, this is where we have the logged in user's name. So we are going to use the user function dot full name. And for this other text label, I'm just going to impute doctor. Okay, now for the first text label, we would change the font weight to semi-bold and change the font color to this. While for the doctor, we are going to set the font weight also to semi-bold and the font color to a lighter shade. Okay. Now we need all of this to align to the left of this container. So to achieve that, we're just going to click on this left or end alignment, and then we have all this aligned to the left. So with that, we've been able to achieve the header of this dashboard we are trying to build. So one last thing we need to do is to create a new custom property for this header component. we need to create a custom property that would allow us reference whatever we have or whatever we input into this text input control and use it within the application. And to do that, we would click on this new custom property. We can just name this search item, and this would be an output property, and this would be text. Now we click on create. We can now search for that custom property we just created and then set the value to this text input control. So that will be text canvas 1. No. So this is why we need to name our controls. So let's just name this txt search patient. Okay, now let's come back to this place. Txt search dot value. All right. So with that, we've been able to create this header component. So the next thing we would create is the side navigation bar, and that would also be created as a component. So come back to this component section, create new component. For the width, we are going to set this to 220, and the height can remain the same. So before we continue, let's quickly check what we have here. So you notice that we have the main navigation menu, and then we have like a category header here, and then we also have this portion at the bottom. So first, let's insert a container, a vertical container. We are going to set the X and Y properties to 0. The width will be parent.width, while the height would be parent.height. Now within this container, we are going to have two sections. First, we are going to have a flexible gallery, flexible height gallery. Let's set the minimum width to 0 and minimum height to 0. Now, okay, we need to give this container a name. Let's say main. You can just say main nav. Once again, set the X and Y properties to 0. Now inside this main nav container, we want to add another container. So the gallery we just added would be for this main navigation, while the container at the bottom would be for these two items here. So we are going to add a vertical container. For this vertical container, we are going to set the minimum width to 0. And we are going to turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 200. Then we will set this drop shadow property to none, and the border radius to 0. Now before we continue, I'm just going to copy the navigation items we will be using for this application and then paste them into the onStart of the app. We also need to create screens for these navigation items. So let's quickly do that. We have the dashboard. We need to create another screen for appointment, another screen for activity, another screen for statistics, another screen for settings, and another screen for support. So we have created all the screens we need to create this navigation menu. So like I said, we have the main navigation items, and then we also have two categories, like headers for categories. So this is for this first header, while these other items are for the main navigation items. Then we have another category header for setting. Now we are going to use this collection, this nav item collection, to create our navigation menu. Okay, another thing we need to do is to ensure that we turn on this access app scope. So let's say we've not turned this on and we attempt to input or use the collection we created. You will notice that that collection is not accessible from the component section of this Power App. But when you turn on this access app scope, we will be able to access whatever we have in the unstart property of the application. Now we can see the nav item. Now within this gallery, the first thing we would do is to insert a horizontal container. Set the drop shadow property to none, the border radius to 0, x and y properties to 0, and for the width we are going to say parent.template width. Yes. Okay, for the height we are going to assign a height of 40. Now let's name this container buttons. So this will serve as the container for the main navigation items we have in that collection we created. So within this container, this button container, we are going to insert a button control. Let's set the alignment to center and then the height property to 40. Then we want this layout to have both the icon and the name. That's the name of the screen and the icon. But we want the icon to come first. So it will be icon before. Now for the text of this button, it would be this item dot item display name, and then for the icon it would be this item dot item icon name. Okay, now we want to set a left and right, a left padding. Let's say left padding of, let's say 20. Okay, for the width we need to set the width to flexible width. Then we need to reduce this, and then the alignment, we want it to be aligned to the left, and then we want to change the button type to subtle. Let's set the left padding to 20, and then this container, we want it to be visible. We want this container to be visible. Currently it is true, and we are seeing this general category and the setting category. And you remember that these are not screens and we don't want them to be clickable. So what we will do is that we will not let this category name to appear for this button container we just created. So to achieve this, we can simply say this item.category. Let's check the property for that. Okay, it is item type. So for this, for the general or for the category, you can see that we used a key of item type, which is category, and then for the main menu we have item type and then button. So let's this item dot item type equals button. So now you will notice that we only have the buttons visible. So for this button, we are going to be doing a couple of things. First of all, we will go to the unselect property of this button, and for the unselect property, we are going to input this set gbl selected button to this item dot key. Then we want to navigate to this item screen. Now when you click on any screen, the application navigates to the selected screen. So another thing we need to do is to set some properties for these buttons when they are active. So for example, when you click on a particular screen, we want the screen name to have a unique color. We also want the icon to have a unique or a different icon style. So to do that, come to the icon style, just copy and paste this. This is GBL selected button, and for the font color, we have this. Also for the font weight, now you will see that the dashboard now has a different or unique color and a unique icon style.
Great ball by Uche. Aila, oh what a miss! It's the miss of the tournament.
We are going to add a vertical container. We are going to give it a height of 40. And we are going to set the Y property to 0. Let's name this container category. Once again, the X property to 0. We are setting the X and Y property to 0. The width to parent.template width. Now inside this container, we are going to add a text label. It's going to be stretched in its parent container, and we are going to give it a flexible height. Now this text label, we are going to set the alignment to start, then the vertical alignment to middle. And for the category container we just created, we are setting the drop shadow property to none and the border radius to 0. Then for the text property, we are going to format the text. We want to make it bold. For the font color, we are going to say app.theme.colors.darker 70. Okay, now for the text property of this text label control, we are going to say this item dot display name, item display name. For the category container, we want it to be visible only when the item display name is category. So for the category container, we are going to say item type. Now I want to move this item type further away from the edge, so we are going to give it a border, a left padding of 20. Then for this button, the left padding is 35. Let's give the gallery of the navigation component a template size of 300. Alright, in order to test the functionality of the component, we need to create these other screens, copy the main component onto the other screens. After doing that, we also need to add a text label and then use this function. So when you navigate across the screens, this text label shows the active screen. the name of the active screen. So you can see that as you are selecting a screen, the name of that screen is highlighted on the body of the application. Now let's go back to the navigation component. We want to create this part of the navigation component. So this is a different container from the main navigation component. This is a separate container. So we already have this here. We are going to add a container. So let's name this, I'm going to name this link. So in this link container, we are going to add another container. We would turn off the flexible height, give it a height of 100 and a width of, let's say, 170 for now. We are setting the alignment to center and a width of 170. Give the border radius of 8 and we are setting the drop shadow to none. So for this container, let's give it a color property or a field property of app.theme.color.primary color. Then we are going to give this, we are going to give the link container a top padding of 20. And inside this link container, let's add a button. The button would be, the text property will be logout. Then we want this to contain the logout icon or exit icon rather. Okay, we want to extend, we want to stretch the width of the button. Actually, let's center it so we can have spaces by the side. That means we would give it a width of 170 also, but we need to set the button type to use transparent. Then we can give this link container a bottom padding of just 5, and we want to give this button a font color, something close to pink. Okay, now for these edges we are going to insert another container. We are going to give it a height and width of, let's say, 50. Then set the drop shadow property to none, the border radius to 0, and then for the color it's going to be white but with a transparency of 50. Then for the border radius, we want like a curved edge at this side. So that part where we want that curved edge is the bottom right. So for this bottom right, let's give it a radius of 32. And then for the other side, we can give it a border radius of 0. And I want to reduce this a bit. Now we can just copy and paste this container inside the link container. Now this time around, we want the top left to be 32 while the others are 0. So we need to set the X and Y properties of this to 0. And with this, I think we've come to the end of the navigation container. So the next thing we are going to do is to create this calendar section. So we'll go back to our components. This would also be created as a component. We are going to create a new component and name this component calendar. And for the height and width, we are going to assign 400 for both. And inside this calendar component, we are going to insert a container, a vertical container, and set the X and Y properties to 0. We are going to set the width to parent.width, and the height to parent.height. So let's just name this calendar home. X and Y properties to be 0. Then width parent.width, height parent.height. So inside this calendar home container, we are going to add a horizontal container. So this is what we are trying to achieve. We've created a container. We are going to create a horizontal container for this month's name, another horizontal container for these days of the week, and then we are going to work on the main calendar itself. So for this container, let's name this month. We are going to turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 35. We are setting the border radius to 0 and the drop shadow to none. Now inside this container, we are going to add a text label. We are going to set the alignment to stretch and give it a flexible width. Then inside this month container also, we are going to add 2 buttons. And for this button, we are setting the height and width to, let's say, 35. Okay, let's set its alignment inside the container to center. Set the height and width to, let's say, 25. Okay. Now we want to have a little bit of space between the controls here and the edges of the container. So for that, let's give it a left and right padding of 10. Actually, for the right alone, let's give it a right padding of 10. Now with this, we want it to be only an icon. We don't want to have a text inside. So this icon will be pointing to the left. So we are using the chevron left icon, and we are setting the border radius 25 also. Let's see. Yes. And the text or font color to white. So let's copy this button again and paste it inside this month component. Now this chevron will be pointing to the right now. Okay. Now for this month component, let's give it a gap of 10. For this text label, we are going to set the alignment to center, and we want the font color to be app.theme.color.Dakar70. Now I want to set the font weight to bold. Now there are a couple of functions we would be adding to the onStart of this application. So let's go to the onStart. We are going to say set. Okay. Now let's go back to the component. And for this text label, the text property is going to be text. So we can't reference the variable we just created because the access app scope has not been turned on. So let's turn it on and try again. GBL current date as and year. Okay, let's run the onStart. And as you can see, we now have the current month and year. Okay, we'll come back to these icons later. Now inside this calendar container, we are going to insert another horizontal container. We are also going to turn off the flexible height and give it a height of, let's say, 20 or 25. Now we are going to turn off the drop shadow property and set the border radius to 0. And inside this container, we are going to add a gallery. We need to add a horizontal gallery. Be adding a horizontal gallery. So we need this to show the days of the week. So for this gallery, we are going to set the minimum width to 0, minimum height also to 0. We are going to set the template size to parent.width divided by 7. Let's remove all this. We don't need this. Text label should be inside the gallery. Okay, now the width of the text label should be parent.template width. For the item property of this gallery, we are going to name it, we are going to say calendar.week short. Now inside this calendar container, we are going to add another container, and this time around is going to be a vertical container. And inside this container, we are going to add a gallery. We are going to delete all the items in this gallery. We don't need them. We are going to set the wrap count to 7. We want to set the template size to parent.width divided by 8.5. And for the text property, for the items property of this gallery, we are just going to copy and paste this function. We are first going to add a button. Let's add a button. Let's set the X and Y properties to 0. For the text, the value is going to be the function, then this item.value. Okay, for the height of this button, we want it to be parent.template height. And for the width of this button, should also be parent.template width. We are going to give this gallery a template padding of 5. Alright, now we can set the X properties to 0. So we need to do a few formatting. First, let's change the button type to sub2. For the button type, let's set the appearance property to this. We need to change the border color to app primary color. We need to change the border, that's this border style. We are going to insert this formula there. So the next thing we are going to do is to also change the font color. We are going to format the font color. Click on the button, and then for the font color, we are just going to copy and paste this formula there. We want the font weight to be normal. Now we can't navigate to other months. What we are going to do is to insert this formula in the onSelect property of the back icon. And we are going to insert this to the other icons too. Okay, so let me just run the onStart again. Now let's see. We want to increase the font size of this to, let's say, 20, and let's give it a left padding of just 5. So the next thing we are going to do is to impute some records in the onStart of this application. So we'll be using this collection for the dashboard, while we would be using this table for the appointment gallery. Now I want to create a little indicator. So like this, for example, this shows us that there is an appointment for the 28th of August. and this shows us that there's an appointment for the 2nd of September. So to achieve that, we are going to select the template of this gallery, and we are going to add another gallery inside there. Okay, for this gallery, we are going to remove all the items. We are going to set its width to parent.template width and the height to just 3. We are going to reorder the button to be at the top. For the y, we say parent dot template height, let's say -8. For the item property of this little or small gallery, we are going to set item to this function here. So inside this gallery, we are going to insert a container. So to insert a container, let's just extend the height of the gallery to this, so we can conveniently insert the container, and then we can now change the height of the gallery back to what it was. Now this container is what should be parent.height -8, and then for the x property, this should be parent.template width. You can also say parent.width -2 self.width divided by 2. Now this has been aligned to the center of this box. Then we are going to set the drop shadow to none and the border radius to 0. And for the fill, we are going to set this to app.theme.colors.primary. For this container also, we are going to set the border radius to 8. So with this, I think we have come to the end of this calendar component. So we are going to insert this calendar component into the calendar section of the dashboard. So we click on this calendar section, and then we insert the calendar components. I'm going to set the width to stretch and the minimum to this. Now let's play and see. I want to give a little space between the bottom of this outline and this little container here. So what I have done to be able to achieve that space is to set the height of the container to this parent.height -14, and to also give a template padding of 5 to this gallery, and then set the height to this also. So the next thing is this appointment section at the bottom. So we are going to add another container underneath the calendar for this doctor's appointment. Inside this calendar container on our dashboard screen, let's add another vertical container. Now for this container, we are going to set the border radius to 0 and also turn off or set the drop shadow property to none. So you notice that we have this header here and an icon here. We also have that same header and icon, the same header and icon, same header and icon. So we are going to create this header as a component so we can use it at these different places. So let's do that. Let's create another component. Let's name this header. So this is going to be a simple component. Let's give it a height of 25. So in this component, we are going to add a horizontal container. We would set the x and y properties as 0. Set the width as parent.width. Drop shadow property to none. Border radius to 0. And then inside this container, we are going to add a text label. We want it to be stretched in the container. We want it to have a flexible width. And then the minimum height should be set to 0 also. For the text property, we need to create a component property. So let's name this section title, input property, and also a data type of text. Then we click on create. Now for this text property, it's going to be section header dot section title. Another thing we need to do is to give it a font, to format the text. So we can give it a font size of 16. You can set it to bold. Then let's use semi-bold. Let's give it a left padding of just 5. That's my change letter. And then for the text, font color, let's say we want the darkest shade. Okay, now let's click on that section component again, and this time around we are going to add an icon. The icon should be inside the container. We can just give it a width of, let's say, 40. Then we want it to be aligned in the center. Let's give it a height of, let's say, 24. And then we are going to change this icon to this. And also for the icon, we are going to change the color to be the same color with the font or with the text. And then lastly, we are going to change the icon style to fill. Alright, now let's add this component to the application. Click on this container here and then insert that component, section header. So we want this to be stretched to fit the parent container. I want to set the minimum width to 0. Now for the section title, this is going to be doctor's appointment. Now we are going to add a gallery to this screen. We are adding a vertical gallery. We are setting the okay. So instead of this image, we are going to insert a container. We want the height of the container to be 50 and the width to also be 50. You can now move this container to align with what we currently have in that gallery. Now inside this container, we are going to add the icon. So we also want this icon to fall in the center of this container we just created. So we are going to say parent.width. You can say same for the height. Now for this icon, we want to have a dynamic icon type. So to achieve that, let's just use this function, this switch function, and then we want to also dynamically select or use a different field for these categories also. So to do that, for the field property, we are just going to use this function also. Now let's come back to the icon. We are going to select a field icon style and we are going to give it a field color or a field of white. I want us to be able to have a border radius around this template. So that means we would need to insert, to use a container. So let's just use a container. Let's set the width to parent.template width and the height to parent.template height. Now we can copy all these things we have in this gallery. You can cut and then paste them inside the container. So we are just changing all the properties where we have template width. We change them to width, and the ones where we have template height, we change them to just height. Now we can now have a template, a border radius for this, and then set the drop shadow to none, and then we would come back here to set template fill to transparent. Okay, now to achieve the template fill, we are going to be using this container we just added, and then for the fill we make it this dot colors dot primary. Okay, for the items property, we are simply going to use this formula. Okay, one more thing we did not add. So we need to add an output, or we need to get an output from this calendar component that we created earlier on, which I missed. So we would go back to the component and add that calendar output. We click on the component and then click on new custom property. We are going to name this custom property selected record, and the property is going to be an output, and then the data type is going to be date and time. Then we click on create. So this gallery is gallery 3. Now we click on that calendar component again, and then we click on this selected record we just created, and then we are going to set the value to gallery 3, which is this calendar gallery here, dot selected dot value. So this way we are able to output the selected date and time from this gallery into the main application. You can just copy this name and then insert it here. So that way we can now check for, or we can now filter for appointments for the selected days. So as you can see, we have this number of appointments for this selected day, and also this number of appointments for this selected day. So one last thing we need to do is to add the time of the appointment. So we can just copy this and paste, and then for this last one is going to be this item. Okay, so with that we have come to the end of this doctor's appointment section of this dashboard. So next we are going to be building the main dashboard in the middle. So the first thing we're adding is this header. So I'm just going to add that as a container. So let's insert a horizontal container, and we are going to turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 40. And then inside this container we are going to have a text label. We are going to set the alignment to stretch. We want it to be vertically aligned to the middle, and want to give it a flexible width. Now inside that same container we want to add a combo box. We also want it to be stretched within the container. We want the width to be, let's say, 150. And then let's select the parent container and give it a left and right padding of 10. And then the container itself, the title or the text property of this is dashboard. Then let's format this text property. We want to make this bold. The font color should be app.theme.colors. For the combo box we are going to say, and then for the default selected is going to be this week. for the parent container, the fill will be transparent, and then the combo box is going to have a fill of white and a border radius of 8. Then we need to set the drop shadow to none and the border radius to 0. We might want to make this bigger. So the next thing is to create this section. So we'll be creating this section as a component. Let's come to the component section and create a new component. For this component, we are going to give it a width of, it should maintain this width, and we are going to give it a height of 80. Now let's insert a horizontal container and set the x and y properties as to 0. We are going to set the width to parent.width and the height to parent.height. Now inside this container, we are going to add 3 other containers. So this would be another vertical container. So let's format this first. We want it to be stretched. We want the minimum width to be 0. The minimum height can also be 0. Drop shadow would be none. Border radius would be 0. So we can just copy this container and paste it in the parent container. So we have 3 different containers. Now in the first container, we are going to add 2 other containers. So let's add a horizontal or a vertical container, Now for this vertical container, we are setting the minimum height to 0 and minimum width to 0. Now inside here, inside the first container, inside its parent container, we are going to add an icon. We want this icon to have a height and width of 50. We want it to be aligned to the center. And we want a little more space between the edge of the parent container and this icon. So just click on the parent container of that icon and give it a left padding for now. So let's give it left padding of 10. And for this container in the middle, we are going to add a text label that would extend to both ends of the parent container. We want it to be aligned to the center. So we need to add another container to this. So let's add a vertical container. So copy and paste the icon inside. Okay, for the container we just added, we are going to set the width to be 50 and the height to be 50. We are going to set the alignment to be in the center and then 50, and this container would be at the left hand side, so you can just move it that way. Now for this, let's set a left padding of 10, and we are going to add another label to this container with a left padding of 10. So for these 2 text labels, we want them to be stretched in the parent container. Let's give them a height of 25, yes. And then want them to be aligned in the center of their parent container like this. Now for the icon container here, we are going to set the drop shadow to none and the border radius to 0. And for this icon, we are going to use the people icon. I want to make it smaller, so we are going to have a padding, an all-round padding of 3 for the parent container of that icon. For the icon, we want it to be filled and it's going to be white. And then for the parent container of that icon, we want to give it a pink light fill. Now for that icon container, we are going to make the border radius 8. Okay. Now for the container that is holding the text, we want to set the drop shadow property to none and the border radius to 0. Now this text property is going to be total staff. Let's format the text. You can make it semi-bold, give it this font color. Let's give it a size of 16, and then for this we want to make it bold, give it this font color, and then let's make the size 16 also. Now let's just copy the container for this icon and the container for this text labels. We are just going to copy both and insert them into the other containers. This would be total patient and this would be total rooms. For the background fill of this icon, we are going to make this a shade of blue, and then for the fill of this bed icon or rooms icon, we are going to give it a green like color. Okay, for this icon we are going to use the home icon, and for this icon we are going to use the person icon. Now let's click on this component. Let's rename it count component. So for this component we are going to create custom properties. So this would be total staff. It's going to be an input property, and then let's make it a number. Then we click on this and then we say count dot total staff. Now let's click on the component again, create yet another custom property and name this total patient. This would be a number, and the last one, total rooms, should also be a number. Now let's click on this total patient text property, and we are going to change it to the component dot total patient, and this the component dot total rooms. Now we are going to bring or insert that component we just created into the dashboard. Okay, we are going to make the component to stretch across the parent container in the screen. Then we set the minimum width to 0, and then each of these tile has a background of white. So let's do that. We are going to make each of these to have a white background. Now we need to have space in between. As you can see, we need to have space in between all of these, so we are going to add space. To do that, we can just give it a gap of 10. We want paddings to the left for each of them, so let's give each of them a left padding of 10. Let's say 15. Then we want to set their border radius to 8. Now let's click on this body container and then give it a gap of 15. Then another thing we need to do is to click on this dashboard container and also add a gap of 15. So that's to leave a gap between the dashboard heading and the other part of the section there. Now this has altered our calendar. I would get back to that later on. Okay, so the next thing we will be doing is to add this patient activity section and this report section. So we are going to add a container to this section of the screen. We'll be using a horizontal container, and let's add this container, the one for the bottom, at once. So we'll go back to the parent container, which is the dashboard container, and then we are going to add a vertical container. And then we can now add 2 vertical containers. So I can copy that again and paste it to the parent container. So we can name this container chat, and we can name this container report. Now I want this container to be smaller, so let's give this a fill portion of 1.5, can now give this a background fill or a fill property of white, and also give this a fill property of white. Now between those two, we want to have yet another gap between them, so we can give them, we can give a gap of 15. Then for this, let's set the drop shadow to none, border radius to 0. For these two also, we are setting their drop shadow to none, but the border radius to 8. And for this last one also, we are setting drop shadow to none, border radius to 8 also. We would also give it a fill of white. So I want this gap to align with the gap at the top. Okay, so that way we've been able to align the gaps. Okay, the next thing we will do is to add the header for this section. So we already have a component for that. We are just going to insert the component section header. The alignment in the container will be stretched, and we are going to set the minimum width to 0. And for the text property, this is going to be patient activity. So we would come to the charts very shortly. Let's add that component to this section also. Section header, can as well just copy from this so it would have the formatting set. So the title is going to be reports, and then for this I can just paste it here also, and the title for this is going to be latest patient data. Okay, for this container we are going to add a gallery, horizontal gallery. Now let's delete all the items inside the gallery. So for the template width or the template size, we can simply say self.width or parent.width, they share the same width, divided by 12. So for the height of the gallery is going to be it's going to be flexible height, and then we will set the minimum height to 0. Next, in this template, we are going to add a vertical container. We want the height to be parent.template height, and then we want the x and y properties to be 0. Drop shadow is none, border radius is 0, and then the width is parent.template width. Now inside this container, we are going to add two things. First is a text label that's going to carry the date. So for that, let's turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 20. And then for the width, we are going to set the minimum width to 0. Then for the font size, let's give it 12, semi-bold, and this color as the font color. Then for the items property of that gallery, we are going to be using this table for the items property. So for this text label, the text property is simply going to be this item dot month. Then we want it to be aligned vertically to the middle and also to the center. Now in that container, in the parent container where we have this text label we just worked on, we are going to click on it and insert another container. This time around we'll be adding an ordinary container. We are going to set the alignment in the container to center, and we are going to set the width to 8. Now we can set the drop shadow to 0 and the border radius to 8. Also, we want the text to be underneath this container we just added. And now for the height of this container, turn off the flexible height of that container and give it a value of 200. And then inside that container, we are going to be adding text label. Now the y property of this text label is going to be the height of the parent container minus the item total, and then the height of the text label is going to be this, we want to remove the text. The field property of this text label is going to be app.theme.color.primary. Then we give it a border radius of 8. And the next thing we will do is this report section. So for this, let's add a vertical gallery. And then for the width of that gallery, we are making minimum height to be 0 and minimum width to be 0. Let's turn off the scroll bar. Before we continue with the formatting, for the items property, I'm going to be using a table also within an icon. So let's have the icon here. Then we also need 2 text labels. So this will be item.date. So let's give it a font size of 10. I want it to be aligned to the center. This is going to be item.note. Now I want to give it all around padding of 5. That means we also give this 5 to the left. For the icon, we are going to be using this formula. And then for the color of the icon also, we are going to be using this formula. Then for the icon style, we can also use this formula. Okay. Now the last thing we would do is to put all of this in a container. Let's select the template and add the container. For this gallery, let's give it a padding of 5. The width of the container should be. Let's cut all these items and paste them inside the container we just added. Okay. Now for the container, we want to have a unique color when it is selected. So I'm just going to copy and paste this formula. Let's make the container smaller. Let's give it a height of 80. Let's see. Okay. So that means the template size will also be 80. So another thing we need to do is to give this container a drop shadow of light. Let's further increase the template padding. Now to the last part of this dashboard, we are going to add another gallery control. And for this gallery control, we are going to be using this table as the items. The template size, let's make it 50. Let's make the minimum height to be 0. Inside the parent container where we have the gallery, we need to insert a horizontal container. Let's turn off the flexible height and give it a height of 35. Then it should be above the gallery. And then inside, we are going to add text labels, 5 text labels. Let's format this first. We want it to be aligned to the middle. Let's give it a left padding of 5, minimum height of 0. Then we can copy and paste this within its parent container. So for this first one, the text property would be date. The second one would be name. The third one would be category. The fourth one would be age. And the fifth one would be settings. So we want this name to be wider than the rest, so we can give it a, in fact they should all be having their flexible width turned on. Okay, now we want this name to have more fill portion, so we can make it like 1.5. We don't want this. We also want to turn off the scroll bar. Then this setting will be aligned to the center. Okay, so that means we would need to add this container inside the gallery. So let's just remove all of this, and then in the gallery, let's simply add this. The width should be parent plate width. Then the height should be parent.template height. The x and y properties to be 0. We want to turn off drop shadow, set border radius to 0, and then for this also we are going to turn off the drop shadow and border radius to 0. Now for the date, this will be this item dot date, name would be this item dot name, category will be this item. So there's no category or country in the table we are using for the items property of this gallery. So I'm going to manually input a country here. So I'm just going to use UK and I'll change this to country. Now this is going to be this item dot age, and for the setting we are going to insert a horizontal container. We are going to set the minimum width to 0. Let's just delete this, and then drop shadow none, border radius none. Then inside here we are now going to add 2 icons, and just copy this and paste. Now we would click on the parent container of those 2 icons and set the justification to the middle and the alignment to the middle also. Now for the first one, this is going to be like an edit icon, so we are going to be using edit for that. And then for the next one, this is going to be a delete icon. Now for this, we want to have a gap between them, so you can just give them a gap of 10. Then want to make this, want to assign a color of this, and then for this you also need to assign a color. Okay, so let's check it out. We can reduce the size of both, so let's make this 30. So I think we can still format this. Let's give them a font size of, okay, now let's see if we can still further adjust this date component. So I simply reduced the template padding. The template padding was reduced to 4.5 instead of the original 5 we used. So with this, we have come to the end of this tutorial video. I believe you've been able to learn 1 or 2 things. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe and share this video. Bye.